Hi everyone, my name is Kemi and you're welcome to Kemafrik. So today I'll be teaching you how to draft a 6 pieces or you can say 8 pieces blouse. So first we'll be starting with the pattern drafting. So I'll be drafting my pattern on paper. Next we'll transfer to our fabric and add our extra allowances. Thereafter we'll move on to the sewing tutorial. So I made a video earlier on how you can create a basic bodice block choosing a half scale measurement. What I mean by that is you'll be using your half length as a shoulder to waist measurement. So thereafter you can attach your peplum or flare there. But in this tutorial, we'll be going through a full scale measurement. That's from your shoulder to your hip line. And thereafter we'll add our allowances and extras to give it that flare-like look. So this particular one we'll be creating has a zip in the front and also a division at the back. So that's what makes it an 8 pieces blouse rather than a 6 pieces blouse, just because of that division. And we'll be attaching the zip also at the front. So let's move on to cutting our pattern and all that. Please leave your comment in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up. So let's go. We'll be working with the following measurements. So I like to start drafting by creating a startup line at the top of my pattern. Right now I'm marking out my zip allowance at the front. Remember, we're working with the front pattern yet. And next I'm marking the half of my shoulder length, which is 7.5 inches, and my neckline 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So now I'm taking my vertical measurement. So I'll mark my bust point, which is at 12 inches, and the under bust at 15.5 inches, and my half length at 18 inches, and the length of my blouse 26 inches. So I'll be doing same on another point on my pattern so that I can draw out my horizontal lines. So right now I'm just connecting the dots, and here is my bust line, and I'm labeling it as my bust line. And next I'll draw out my under bust line. Next I'll be drawing out my half length, which is my waistline at my half length. And lastly, my hip line, represented at the hem of my blouse. So remember the 3.5 by 3.5 inches, we marked that at our neckline, so I'm connecting it with my curve. I'll come down at the shoulder point by 1 inch because our shoulders are not straight, so I'm creating my shoulder slant. And next I'll mark we are creating our armhole, and I'm marking 7.5 inches. I used the same measurements I used for my shoulder length, which is 7.5 inches. So I'm connecting it to create my armhole. Good. So at the midpoint of this my armhole line, coming in by half an inch so I can create my armhole curve. So I'm connecting the edge of my shoulder line to the 0.5 inch dot I just marked, and then connecting it to my chest line to create my armhole curve. The next thing I'll be doing is to mark out my dart line. So I'll take my bust pan, divide it by 2, which is 4 inches here, mark it at my hip line and my bust line and connect the dots. So we have created a dart line. Because we'll be creating a bustier, we need to modify the usual dart. So right now I'm marking ½ inch towards the center front and another 1.5 inches at towards the right of my pattern, both at my under bust line and my waist line. So at the bust line, I marked 1 inch above and below my nipple point. So I'll be connecting this dot to the ½ inch mark I initially created and the 1.5 inch on the other side of my under bust. I'll be making use of a curved ruler here. So next, I'll connect using a straight ruler to the dots I marked on the waistline. So right now, I'm joining the lower part of my dart towards my hemline, using a straight ruler to make a connection like so. So to the final part of my dart, I'll use a curve ruler to connect my bust line, that's 1 inch above my nipple point, to the midpoint of my armhole curve. Now I need to tighten my armhole a little bit, so I'm coming down by 1 inch from the line we first created and connecting the lines as so. So because of this, I will need to extend this new line by 1 inch and also extend my bust by 1 inch. So right now I'm taking my horizontal circumferences divided by 4 and I'm adding an extra 1 inch at the armhole because of the 1 inch cutout we did there. Next, I will divide my waist circumference by 4 and mark it out on the waistline, but then I'll need to add the extra 2 inches I took out for my dart to this measurement. So I'm marking about 11 inches there. So I'm just cross-checking my bust line to be sure I did it right. So next, we'll also mark your hip circumference divided by 4 and you take the measurement there. Now we have not taken out any darts at the waistline, so we won't need to add anything more. And now I'll be connecting all these dots together. And here I'm just modifying my neckline to create a V neckline. And we're ready to take our side dart. So the difference between my front and back half length is 2 inches. So just below the bust line, I marked 2 inches and connected my dart like so. And we are ready to cut. So I'm cutting out all my panels. At this point, I realized I didn't complete my armhole. So from the 1 inch extension to the 1 inch extension on the side, I connected my dots and continued with my pattern cutting. So now we're done cutting our pattern. Next, I want to fold in my side dart. So I am just folding my bust line on my front side panel, and just watch how I take in my 2-inch side dart. Done. Now just tape it down so it doesn't come off, and that's exactly what I'll be cutting on my fabric. So this way both our front and back pattern will become equal at the side. So now we'll move on to our back pattern, and first I'll be taking my vertical measurement, a half length of 16 inches. Remember, the difference between the front and back for this pattern is 2 inches. So we have half length of 16 inches and length of 24 inches. So I've marked out my horizontal lines, that's the waistline and the hip line, and I'm marking my shoulder at 7.5 and my neckline using 3.5 inches by 1 inch and connecting the dots like so. So next I'm marking my back armhole line, that's my chest line rather, and creating my armhole. I also drop the shoulder by 1 inch like we did for the front. And I'm creating my chest line and connecting my shoulder line, and at the midpoint of my back armhole I won't need to come in by 0.5 inches like we did for the front, but I'll just connect the dots to my chest line. Now at my waistline I'm marking my waist circumference divided by 4, and also remember to add 1 inch for the dart to whatever measurement you have taken. And at the chest line I'm marking my bust circumference divided by 4. At the hip line I'm marking my hip circumference divided by 4. Now I'll be connecting all these dots together. So the next thing I'll be doing is to create my dart. So at the waistline I marked 4.5 inches, and I'll be taking a dart ½ inch towards the center back and towards the right of my pattern from this point. So I marked 6 inches above my waistline. So 6 inches above my waistline, and at this point I also marked 4.5 inches so I can have a straight line. So I'm connecting my dart legs from this point to my waistline, and I'll be doing the same towards my hip line. So now I'll be creating a princess tie line at my back. So I'm connecting the apex of my dart to the midpoint of my armhole. Right now I want to create a tightening at the back of my pattern piece. So I took in 3/4 inch at the center back, but I also added that same 3/4 inch right back on my waistline, so we don't have any deficit at all. So I'm just connecting this point, and this will help eliminate the back bulge. So we're done with this pattern, and I'll just cut out my pattern, and next we'll be placing it on our fabric and adding our allowances. Now to the cutting of our fabric. This is the part where we'll be adding all our allowances. So because we want to create a flare-like look, we'll add extra 3 inches on both sides of each panel. So I'm just drawing out from the waistline. So I'm drawing from the waistline to the hem of my blouse and extending it by 3 inches on the sides, and I'm adding 1 inch at the hemline to serve as a seam allowance. So I'm just cutting out my pattern. So while cutting my pattern, I also need to add an extra ½ inch on the princess tie line of each panel. On the princess tie line, on the neckline, the armhole, and 1 inch at the side seam allowance. Along the princess tie line too, so in order to make it easier when you're sewing, you need to notch at your waistline, notch at the under bust line, and also notch your bust points at the bust line. So this will come in handy when you are joining your patterns together. You know exactly where to match each panel together. So here's my first panel. So I'll just go ahead and do this same thing to every piece we have. So I somehow missed recording this part where I took in 1 inch on all the sides of my panel. So note that when you cut out your panel, create a curve along the hemline. 1 inch above the hemline, you just create a curve like I did for that first panel. So this is the center front panel, and along the zip allowance, you won't need to add any other allowance. Remember to put in your notches like I'm doing, and add your ½ inch allowance all through. So you only add 1 inch when you're cutting the side panel, you know, the seam allowance at the side of your clothes. Now you can go ahead and cut the back panel just like I did for the front, adding all your allowances and extras. So these are all our panels beautifully laid out, and before we move on to sewing, we'll be cutting the pad, the breast pad. So we'll be using a soft wadding because I really didn't want this particular dress to look padded, so I'll be making use of a soft wadding. So now I'm marking out my pad on my pattern. So instead of just cutting it randomly, this will make sure you have your pad fitted in accurately. So I took my radius, which is the distance between my bust line and my other bust line, so 3.5 inches all around my bust point, and I took 4 inches above the bust point. So I'm doing the same thing on the left panel, the center front panel, and marking out my pad, my wording as so. So I'm done marking, and I can go ahead to cut out my pattern. So we'll be cutting 2 pieces for each of these pieces you can see on the table. But before I do that, I'll need to label each piece, and so I'm just labeling the side, the center, and then I'm marking the top of each piece of my breast pad. So I'm taking my wording now, I'll be cutting my breast pad, and along the part where you have your nipple point, remember we added half an inch allowance, so we need to add that same half inch on one side of our wording. That's the side where we have our nipple point, our breast point. So on all the other sides, on the other side of the wording, you won't need to add any allowance at all. So also remember to notch your bust point here, so that you can just place it directly on the bust point of your fabric. This way you get to know how important notching your pattern is. Now we are done drafting and cutting our pattern, our fabric, and the breast pad. I will encourage you to watch our next video where we'll be going through the sewing process. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so as quickly as possible, because we'll be uploading lots of great stuffs here, and we'd love to have you around. Thank you very much for watching.